watching, here to find you watching. 5 more things I wish Nerf modders would stop doing. That's right, it's been over a year since the last one and I got 5 more things to complain about. 7 if you count the honorable mentions. Now, before I begin, I know there's gonna be at least one person during this who's gonna be typing, Bobo, doesn't this go against your gatekeeping thing from the last video you did? Shh, 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 hey, quiet. These are my opinions. It's my video, I'm gonna say them, all right? Quiet, shh, it's okay. Now I did say there's 2 honorable mentions, then we might as well get those out of the way, with the first one being this weird thing that I don't know why it bothers me, but it does, and that's just feet in pictures of your blasters, like when people are showing them on the workbench and they got 2 little feet down at the bottom. This has been going on since like before I joined Nerf Haven. I don't really know why it gets to me, but it just does. Get your feet out of the picture. Just move them, crop them, get them away. The second honorable mention is something that I feel is gonna be a bit divisive, but I think people need to spend less time trying to look really cool and more time thinking practically. Like, I get you wanna dress up and look awesome or be your favorite character or whatever, but some of the masks and some of the stuff that I see people throwing up onto like groups look so restrictive and so heavy and so cumbersome. And all I can think is like, how soon is the heat exhaustion gonna be kicking in, or how much sweaty condensation are you gonna be breathing in with the mask? I think there should be less thought about how cool you're gonna look to everyone and more of, how much is this gonna weigh? How restrictive is this gonna be? Am I going to be wanting to take it off during an event? It's one of those things that kind of bothers me. I get that there's a LARPing side to this hobby, but man, some of you guys have awful taste in what's gonna be wearing you down or wearing you out. And with those 2 out of the way, let's get into the real list. And there are 5 things, with number 1 being something I'm very opinionated on, very strongly opinionated on. That's not clickbait. But number 5 is people asking, what's the best insert whatever here, without giving more information or just general information as to what that best pertains to. Now, this question doesn't just happen within this hobby, it is everywhere in life. What is the best CPU for a computer? What is the best dog food for my dog? What is the best car to drive? And it's a very hard question to answer when you don't give any other specifics. What type of dog do you have? How energetic is it? Does it have any allergies? What type of PC are you making? Is it gonna be for editing, gaming, or light load work? What type of car do you like to drive? Do you have a big family? Are you a single person? Do you like going off-road? Do you like taking the curves on the mountainside? Without general information, the best is super hard to pinpoint because best is always subjective to the person asking it. Especially when it comes to blasters, we need to know things like, what FPS are you going for? What's the purpose of this blaster? What are the event restrictions that you're gonna be using this blaster at? And for flywheels, there's even the question of, what is the battery tray space that you're gonna be putting a LiPo into when people ask what's the best LiPo? You need to add more information to the question so you don't get more questions back and you can get to that answer as soon as possible. And with more information given right off the bat, you might get information you never even thought of. Some questions get thrown out there and people just bombard it with all this information, loads of good information that I'm sure the OP didn't necessarily think they were gonna get. So when you're thinking about asking what's the best, always include more information as to what that best pertains to, because again, best is subjective. Number 4 is for the integrators out there, or just modders in general, and that is not sanding down epoxy putty or leaving hot glue on the blaster, especially if you're going to go paint it. And I'm sure a lot of you have been out there roaming through the forums or the groups and you see it, a cool integration, a really nice integration, covered in a cool paint job, a nice paint job, and then you see it. The tumor on the side of the blaster, that blob of epoxy putty that wasn't sanded down and it's just sticking out like a sore thumb, or that hot glue puddle mess on the side covered in spray paint. And ooh, it really gets to me. And now I know not every modder, not every Nerfer has the means to get it off, or maybe it's their first integration so they didn't really think about it and they're just really happy to get that integration out there. I totally get it, that's fine. But there's always solutions to help you out with this problem. My solution to this is also one of the more expensive ways, and it's getting a Dremel or a rotary tool, putting on a low grit sanding wheel, and just blasting through the epoxy putty with it, cutting through it like it's nothing, taking your time, eyeballing it, getting it down to about where you want it, and then hitting it up with some medium grit sandpaper to help smooth it all out. One of the least expensive ways of taking care of this in a way that requires almost no tools is to get your epoxy putty, lay it down where you want, and then follow up with a wet finger. The wet finger will help smooth that epoxy down to where you barely need to sand it or sand it at all. And there's also epoxy putties on the market like Epoxy Sculpt that give you a really long cure time to really hone in what you're wanting to do. You can follow it up with a higher grit or no grit at all if you like how it looks, but this way is so cheap and so easy. You don't need any special tools like a Dremel, and you might not even need sandpaper to do it. Very cheap, but it works. Hot glue, on the other hand, does not like being sandpapered, nor does it like being dremeled at. It will melt onto your Dremel bits and it will just clump up into these pills on your blaster if you sandpaper it. What you can do with hot glue is take a heating element like a hair dryer and kind of reflow it onto the surface if you want to stick with just hot glue. It's a pretty good method. You got to be careful because it can get everywhere and your integration might twist around, so keep your eye on it. But that's what you can do with hot glue if you don't want to back it up with something like epoxy or epoxy putty. And I'm sure there's a lot of integration wizards down there in the comments. If you have a way to take care of epoxy putty that's different from what I explained or a different way of taking care of hot glue, leave them down in the comment section. I want to see how you tackle this issue. The third item on this list is asking people to name your build for you. It's a bit of an oddball one, but I feel when you ask others to give your blaster or your build a name, not only do you get the kind of generic names, the kind of Call of Duty-esque, the kind of Warhammer-esque, the real Steelish sort of stuff like, you know, Lightbringer or Plaguebearer or Warmonger or Osiris or something like that. I feel when you have others name stuff for you, it takes away the DIY-ish nature of it. What makes that build yours? The story of how you came to name that blaster. Could it be something from your past, from a show you like, from a game you really love, something that impacted you? Does it have to do with the paint job? Does it have to do with the rate of fire? What made you name that blaster the way you did? What kind of connects you to that blaster? And on top of that, not every build really needs a name. Like a pump action retaliator doesn't really have to be named anything. There was a time back in the day when integrations got these kind of trademark stamps to them. So like a Firefly Stampede build was called a fly stamp or a stamp fly or a fly peed or something like that. Really generic stuff was just kind of thrown onto them. And even if you take the principle of the build, for example, the Chaos pistol that I did, it's a Nerf Chaos that's been put into the size of a pistol. That sounds awesome right off the bat. It's a pistol that brings chaos. It's a chaos pistol! Just sounds metal as hell, and it sounds cool. It sounds badass. So you don't have to go overboard with your name. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but I feel like if you make it yours, that's what matters. You are putting yourself into that build and no one else has this sort of influence onto it. You are giving it the mark that you think it deserves. Number 2 on this list is Photoshop concepting. Originally, it was going to be concept threads in general, but I wanted to whittle it down to what really bothered me about that idea. One of them was asking what is the best, and this is what I'm calling Photoshop concepting. I know not everyone is ready to go when it comes to integrating. Either you don't want to cut into your blasters just yet, you want to see if an idea is going to work, maybe a blaster you have is hard to find, you definitely don't want to mess it up, or you're waiting to buy the blasters when you know what you want to do is all set and it's going to work. What I've seen happen a lot, and granted it has stopped and slowed down a little bit lately, is people going onto Google Images, taking the pictures of the blasters they're going to use, dragging them into Photoshop or MS Paint or whatever photo editor you use, and putting it together on there. The problem with this has to do with proportions and scale. What is on the screen is not really going to translate into real life, especially if you don't go about scaling. I've seen things where the scales are just all off, parts are definitely not the right size, things are not going to work in real life, and the problem comes down to when you go to build that idea, it's just not going to work. And the main problem is that you're kind of wasting your time. It's not a good idea to do it from the start. Get to your blasters that you have, get the blasters you intend to build, measure twice, cut once, open up the shells, dry fit them together how you would like them to go, figure out what's gonna work before you do the cutting or while you do the cutting. Start big, move it down as you go to about the right size so you don't cut too much and can't go back or have to do a lot of work to fix it. Leave the computer to the side, get to work with your hands and figure out how to do it in real life. Photoshop concepting should just die already. It's not gonna work. Before I get into the number one most extreme, most controversial, most divisive, most clickbait, doctors hate him for this one trick, whatever YouTube likes these days, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters. People like Ryan Cho, Biggs NZ, CJ Aussie Nerfer, Scott Tomlin, and Foam Blast, along with all my other lovely patrons for supporting this channel through the Patreon platform. Great way to support the channels you love in times like these. And if you would like to support this channel outside of watching a few YouTube ads every now and then, go down to the link in the description as always and check it out. I appreciate all of them and I appreciate all of you for watching this video. Let's get into the number one spot. The number one spot on this list, and it is number one even without there being a real order to all this, something I'm strongly opinionated on, something that I think needs to absolutely end in this hobby, is all black blaster paint jobs. I'm not talking about some black. I'm not talking about large spots of black. I'm talking about all black to super high majority black paint jobs. Basically, all black paint jobs to me are boring. They lack interest. There's no pop to them. It's flat black. It's just lazy. It's the attempt to bring the tacticalness and realism of real steel into our hobby, which I think is unnecessary to begin with. And in a way that isn't so much an opinion, all black blasters are just dangerous. Now, before I get jumped on for just not liking tactical builds or real steel builds, let me say this. I absolutely love seeing what LARPers do with their builds. Usually it's LARPers of the European variety, but they do amazing work to make their stuff interesting. And yes, I know that real steel stuff comes in all black a lot, but you can do things to it to make it just better. What pops more than all black? What can take your all black yawn fest to the next level? Literally almost anything. The work people do to these small plastic toys to make them into dystopian future weapons, weapons of the great wars, is amazing. Add some color, add some real wood, add fake wood grain that you've painted onto something, put some metal, put some rusting, add that gritty awfulness to the blaster. Whatever you do to make it look more real in a sense that makes it visually pop is gonna be infinitely better than just taking one color or two or three that are very close to the same sort of area on the color spectrum and blasting that onto your blaster. You can do better than this, and you can take it to another level while still keeping it looking real. It's amazing what you can do when you put a little bit of time into an all black build. Even if it's just dry brushing the edges to add some silvery pop is way more interesting than leaving it flat black. Highlighting some areas with like yellow is infinitely more interesting than leaving it all black. Now I could talk about this section in its own 30-minute video, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna condense it down into the main point of this. Yes, there are people who use all black blasters in private events, private land, and some people don't even bring them outside of their house. That's fine, but it does not disregard the absolute danger that these things can have. I've heard of HVZ games, NIC games, and just normal public park games having the cops called to them because someone was worried about what people were holding. There have been HVZ games that have had college campuses shut down because someone was using a black blaster. And sometimes it's not even a black blaster, it's a stock paint job that causes this problem. It doesn't matter if the blaster has an orange tip on it that I know a lot of people like to call out in comment sections, or if the campuses had HVZ flyers up for the event before it starts. Care needs to be taken with these things. A quick Google search and I was able to find multiple examples of police called, and with how police are in the US, things can turn bad quickly, and that's why I take this as seriously as I do. We do not need people getting hurt, nor there being fear surrounding our hobby. Now, as a moderator of a group that does not allow realistic paint jobs or all black paint jobs, I've seen the debates about orange tips or what's illegal and what's not illegal. It does not matter to me. It is a very serious part of our hobby that I think too many people throw to the side and don't take it seriously enough. Not only that, but an all black paint job with no finesse, no spice, no variety to it is just lazy, and I will fight you on that if you disagree. We can do better, you can do better. Leave the awesome LARP paint jobs. Leave the real talent, this is gonna sound so pretentious, leave the real talent of making a realistic paint job. Take the boring, lazy approach and just get it out of this hobby. That's my opinion on this. Yours can differ, but that is my #1 spot for the 5 more things I wish modders would stop doing. I asked this in the last video and I'm gonna ask it again. If you have 5 things or just anything that you think modders should stop doing that isn't on this list or the previous list I did, leave it down in the comment section below. Hopefully you're not pissed off at me or hate me for some reason. We can all agree to disagree if it really comes down to it. But I hope you are having a good one. Hope you're staying safe. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Only go out for the essentials. It's craziness out there. Stay safe, and I hope you are having a great one wherever you are.